Okay, that's how I'm gonna start.
Like, again, I ended up being a director I was on the team for 9 years and directed for 7. And at the top of my mind for all 7 years and from gen to gen to gen was the priority for me as a director was to make sure that SGBM keeps the integrity of who we are at our core.
From a value standpoint, like
yes.
Historically, and
yeah,
okay, I guess that's my question too, right? And I understand that and I appreciate that because I think that's so important.
Yeah.
And I'll share. You've traveled with me back to Virginia a couple of times now with the team that I was able to co-found with Dope in Virginia Tech, and they just had their 10-year, right?
Yep.
And so we've had our own history as well. But for us, we're a collegiate team, so It's a little bit different because you have hopefully all 4 years, and then there's a change in leadership, and this is a little bit harder. And for us, it was really based around serving the community. We still provide the free class once a week, which I think is fantastic. And their skill level has just jumped up out of nowhere the last couple of years. But stylistically, I've seen that team, right? My team, not even just evolve, but change in different directions. And I feel like SGBM, for the most part, has been decently consistent with it. So when we're talking about passing the torch, where does style fit into that?
Yeah, I think so. I'll share that like one of the core values. And, I feel like I established the terminology for it and added some structure in my time, again, to be able to very clearly articulate when you join this team, this is what to expect. And this is what's important to us. Yeah. And hopefully you'll discover that that's important to you in some shape or form as well. There's a piece of that you can take with you. But one of the values that SGBM holds closely is exploration. And that goes back to the original 4 overlords. Like when you think about KB, Ben, KJ, and Lando, they don't move. Like they don't choreograph the same. They don't artistically express themselves the same. Yeah. You might argue that like Lando and KB have some similarities, and that's because very much like Lando is certainly influenced by KB. But like when you get to the nitty gritty, learning the pieces from Lando was very different than learning from KB. Already since Gen 1, SGBM had 4, artistic leaders that were very different. And KB very much embraced the idea that we would take all of this, like all these different avenues and just make it work together.
Right.
And so when I talk about wanting to encapsulate what KB created, to protect the integrity of who we are at our core, that was my job as a director as well. When I got a new wave of dancers, like say in Gen 7 in 2012, they stand out in my mind because a lot of dancers who had already had a dance experience at the community, Gen 7 specifically, a lot of them joined SGBM. And so was very familiar with some of the dancers, may not have known them very well, but I'm like, yeah, I know that person teaches class and I know that person's a choreographer and whatnot. So as a director, it's my job, again, to look at like artistically what's in front of me and how do we bring that together to create whatever it is we want to do on stage. And when I talk to SGBM generation after generation, I always tell them, like, just go back to the Body Rock performances. You can skip every other, performance out there and just watch Body Rock from 06 all the way up till, now. And you'll see that the medleys are very different as far as like the vision and maybe the artistic, idea on there. But who we are at our core is still in there. The idea that we will take multiple styles. Sometimes we'll tap into some like foundational or street styles and want to throw that in there. It really just depended on the generation. And that became important to us. And as a director, it became important to me that we didn't like create this formula or create this mold that we would just kind of replicate. And certainly know no shade to teams that do that, because it absolutely happens. Because when you have a formula that works for you, why not replicate it, right? Whether that's a formula that gets you trophies, or a formula that makes the process efficient and easy for everybody, like replicate whatever's important to you. But what was important to us and to me was the idea that we would continue to try new things. And did we always like hit the mark? Not every time, but I'd rather say that we gave that a try and be criticized for it than say we did the same thing over and over and over and left people uninspired.
Yeah.
So, and that's just my personal take on like how I wanted to lead that process. But yeah, I look back at like Body Rock, like 2008 and Body Rock in 2013, the casts are very different. But like the idea of like introducing different styles and like really merging that together, that's still ingrained in who we are. And I'd like to think that shows up in like the majority of our performances.
Yeah, I think SGBM is always good for an all style section for the most part, right? Or some type of style. And I'm very lucky to have a exposure, I won't say foundation, but an exposure to many different styles coming up. And I remember, I forget which set it was. I'm thankful it wasn't Body Rock, but it was one of the performances. And they go, "Hey, Andrew, you're going to be one of the B-boys." And I said, "Oh." I said, "Okay." And so, there's only 4 or 5 of us on stage, and I'm doing CCs, and I'm like rolling around. I really have no idea what I'm doing, except for like, what minimal foundation I do have. And if you look close, I think it was UP. There's one section where we're doing CCs, and I literally just kind of sit down for a little bit, like my butt's on the ground, like, oh, this is not working.
Right.
But it's just one of the things that I loved about SGBM, and why I was very lucky that SGBM and you and the council at the time had let me on midway through a season, is because that there was an appreciation for all styles, for exploration. And I knew that going into the team, and you guys delivered every time. And one of the things I get worried about, or that we talk about, and a lot of leaders in the community talk about, is, as we get into this next season of our community, right? And the new gen is coming up. They're either going into existing teams or they're making their own teams. And so for those that are going into existing teams, I think there's kind of 2 ways I've seen the new gen come about it. And either they come in understanding the roots and wanting to grow those roots and expound upon the legacy, or they really want to come in and make a mark, with what they can do for it. And I don't know if one is really wrong or right, but being a director was around for 7 years as a director, seeing a lot of very, very talented dancers come up, a lot of good choreographers come on your team, right? While you're host or directing. How do you manage that part of it?
Yeah, I think, I reflect back, and we're like finally getting to answering this question you asked, 20 minutes ago, right?
Don't worry, I'm good. I'm getting back to it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because I would argue, back in the early 2000s, there was certainly like a hierarchy to the dance community, or the way you pursued, kind of your dance journey.
What do you mean?
There weren't really all males. There's just a handful of them. So that wasn't really like a starting ground for a lot of people. It might have been for some. And then there was really only like Future Shock as one of the few junior teams available. So if you came on as a collegiate dancer, it was 220, or it was Formality. Formality wasn't collegiate because it wasn't tied to a college, and it didn't, the way you describe what happens with Dope at Virginia Tech, we didn't rotate leaders every couple of years because they graduated or anything like that. I've literally named 3 teams in the community. And then from there, it was the exhibition team. So there almost had to be this rite of passage for like, if you were coming into the community and you were young, it was a junior team, obviously. Or unless you're Kevin Belisario, you're 9 years old and you joined Formality and danced with a bunch of adults.
Wait, but Kevin's on Formality?
Yeah, we danced together. We're like literally.
That makes so much sense when I watch it now.
I was 18. He was 9, and now he's on
so much sense when I watch him now.
Cookies now, and he's like 6 feet tall. It kind of blows your.
He's one of my favorite movers right now.
Oh, he's fantastic, and it's because he learned like, you know, so many styles and went to like an art school, and yeah, he's like the nicest guy in the world. So
yeah, he is. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, and then there was the exhibition teams, and I think I would argue most of us viewed the exhibition teams like Urban Effects, Culture Shock, and like Funks and Culture Shock LA, and you know, the exhibition teams were really like the cream of the crop, and like the best dancers in the community were on those teams. So you almost had to like earn your way into one of those teams. So you would graduate from a competition team onto an exhibition team when people felt you were ready to do so.
Wait, you graduated from a competition to an exhibition?
Yes. That's essentially,
really?
Yeah. And I don't know that was necessarily on purpose, but it was just at the time. Culture Shock San Diego was arguably like the best team in the country. I you know, in 2000, in 2002, I don't imagine there was another team doing what they were doing at the level they were doing. Now we could never maybe prove that, but they were so freaking good. I hope somebody can prove me wrong. Like that's how like mind blow. And so when you're on 220 or you're on Formality, you might love it there, and you know, for 220 you'll graduate out eventually. But you know, the dream would be to be on a team like Culture Shock and dance alongside, because dancers on Culture Shock, Urban Effects, Funks, a lot of them were also industry dancers at the time. So they were driving up to LA and doing the auditions. You know, and that's, people wanted to be a part of that, especially if you wanted to pursue dance as a career. The goal was certainly to learn from what would be considered the best at the time. And so that's what I mean by like hierarchy. You had to graduate into an exhibition team. And I think what happened eventually is like over the years, if enough 220 dancers graduate out there, and these dancers still want to dance, but there's not enough room on these exhibition teams, something else has to take shape to give these dancers a home, right? And so eventually other teams would sprout. And I would argue that's essentially how, probably at a real like simple level, how our community has grown since I joined in 2001 is like, you know what, more people are getting into this, but you can't have teams that are like 60, 70 people deep. Eventually something else has to take shape, and somebody's going to have to lead those situations. And so, yeah, you might have the occasional dancer step up and say like, hey, I've got a vision and I want to start something my own. And I feel like I have enough support from the people around me to be able to do this. And it's not unlike the same way KB said, I want to start a team because my best friends have one and I've got something to say. He just happens to be KB. So hell yeah, people are going to follow him.
Right.
But other people may not have the same, following, but they certainly, teams like, not a lot of people know that there was a Funks SD chapter for a little while.
I didn't know that.
It didn't live for a long period of time. But again, certainly there were leaders who worked with the Funkonometry name because there was a Funks LA, and then eventually Emerson Aquino founded Funks SF.
That's one of my favorite teams.
Yes, absolutely. Also one of the most iconic teams in our community's history as well, and also fostered so many amazing dancers that we have all over the industry at this point.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But yeah, little known fact, when I founded Morse All Male in 2001, Emerson was the director of 220, and he was my all male coach because his little brother, Elmer, was my co-captain. So again, very small world. And I've known Emerson since I was in high school. And shout out to Emerson, who's done incredible work for the community for what
that's
feels
definitely
like
a community name everybody needs to know as well.
Absolutely. So
yeah. But I think I like that you say that, and that perspective is so great, because this is how I know you're my big brother and why you're a great mentor to me, and you help me grow and evolve my thinking. Because I would say that even a couple of years ago, I would have said something like, why are all these young bucks starting teams?
Yeah.
Right? Because the initial thought is, why not, to your point, go in, join a team, earn your stripes, fight your way on stage. And, some people don't, my thought was, some people don't want to put that work in. They just want to get on stage.
Sure.
Right. But I think what you said is absolutely valid, that sometimes there is not enough space for everyone on a team, and we need to have growth, and that's how we do grow. Yep. And then, one thing that you said that I think resonated with me is, if someone has already put that time in or that work in, then we should absolutely let them explore their directive creative side on a different scale, on a different level. Right. Like, I think what people have a problem with is if someone who's only been dancing for 2 years really, hasn't, doesn't know their sevens from their eights and, all that stuff. And they want to go start a team. Well, if it's with their friends, that's fine. Do your thing, have fun. But when you want to compete with the best of the best, it seemed disrespectful at the time. And I don't know if it needed to be that way. I think we're the old guard, and we want to kind of protect it a little bit. And I think what you said and how you foster the community is very, very beautiful.
Yeah. And, it goes back to, and thank you for that, but I think it goes back to, like, looking back on it now, like when I was leading SGBM, the exploration being like a core value of the team, like I was never the artistic director because I never felt like I had to fill those shoes. And it certainly wasn't my strength. I can certainly have a vision and say, this is how I want to storyboard our medley. And I know how to, like, tap into the talent to bring that vision to life. That was more exciting for me than actually creating, like, or choreographing a piece, because it aligns more with my passion and my skill set. Right. So the goal for me always was to foster an environment through that exploration, that value that I value so much, to, like, inspire my dancers to want to create, give them the platform to try something new, because there's a lot of hungry choreographers out there who never get their shot on a team.
Yes.
Right. Because maybe their artistic directors or their artistic, council or group is well established and there's no, like, getting in there at some point. Sometimes dancers just get so hungry they want to be able to express themselves in a different, like, avenue or format. And sometimes that, shows up in the form of, like, a project where they kind of get it out of their system and they do it one and done, or they do it for a season or two, a couple performances here and there. And other times they're inspired to, like, lead others and start new teams. And many of, the dancers that I've worked with in my career have absolutely moved on to, teams that are higher caliber and start their own teams and start their own project. And I'm absolutely thrilled for them, because if they get to practice or they get to explore themselves in a space that I've helped create, then hell yeah, like, go contribute something great to the community, because I'm not going to let crappy people on my team, people with bad intentions. I felt like that was important to me to filter through, like, why you were here. But, like, if you're in and you want to be a part of this, for 2 or 3 years or 4 years or whatever, and then eventually move on to do something, I think that's my responsibility to help you do that in the community. If I see your vision and I see what you want to do and I can help you with that, then as a leader, I almost feel obligated to do so. And I know not every community sees it that way, or every team or every studio, where, sometimes we're reluctant to share our dancers, or we get a little bitter when someone, like, moves on to another team, and there can always be that animosity. And believe me, like, the San Diego community has its fair share of that. Like, when Urban Effects broke off from Culture Shock, like, that was not a very pretty picture for a little while.
I remember.
But eventually, but when you think about it, like, if that didn't happen, we wouldn't have Urban Effects, who very much fit their own mold and their own space very separately from Culture Shock. And even though it wasn't, like, an ideal way for that to happen, like, ultimately all the drama was squashed and everybody was good. But then you think about Yeah, and then from there, Culture Shock continued to inspire these people and these teams, and then Urban Effects continue to inspire these people and these teams, and that just becomes the natural kind of like evolution of things. It's not always pretty, and people aren't always happy about it. But that's one thing I've learned. You know, you kind of have to roll with it, and you know, you want to be able to do the best you can with what happens. So I've learned it's safer to be on the supportive side and say, like, you know what, like that sounds a little risky, but like I support you. Go do it. I'm here if you need anything. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But like again, I think I'm aligned with the mentality that they would rather have tried and failed than not. Yeah. You know, or stayed on the team and were unhappy because they didn't get their shot to like, you know, contribute the way they wanted to. So
that makes sense, especially when I think about the roster of SGBM through over the years. I mean, our team has definitely been a launching pad for many great creatives, you know, on and off stage. And to your point, a lot of people who want to go do their own projects or have their own teams are moving different, like physically moving different. Like Seeson's a great example. Right. Like with the most, like he has a very unique style that's to him, and it looks really good on stage for him and how he blocks it. And only he could do what he wanted to do. And, you know, convince him, you know, in Houston, Dom with It's a Wave, like I think he had something to say and he wanted to move a certain way, and he found people that were like-minded, and that wouldn't fit on every team. You know, and I think he had to do that. And so, yeah, it makes complete sense to me. And I'm glad you share that, because I think that's a mature level of directorship, of community leadership on it. And that kind of segues into, now that you have grown up through the dance community,